biting winter of 1976, a routine mail delivery in the quiet town of Mozhga transformed into an unforgettable nightmare. The mailwoman cautiously pushed open the unlocked wooden door, stepping into a freezing house that was completely enveloped in absolute, heavy silence. Behind the traditional brick stove, the lifeless body of 61-year-old Tamara Tsareva lay frozen in a highly distorted and tragic posture. A heavy metal nail was driven deeply into her neck, and a thick, stain-like dark black liquid slowly oozed onto the floor. The horrific scene left the witness paralyzed with pure terror, her scream catching in her throat as she stared at the horror. Within 30 minutes, Soviet investigators arrived at the remote edge of town, immediately cordoning off the grim, isolated winter crime scene. Welcome back to True Crime. Today we unravel a terrifying historical case of deep deception, absolute betrayal, and an innocent person wrongly convicted. The initial examination of the victim revealed an agonizing truth, showing that the elderly woman had endured brutal torture before her death. The front door showed absolutely no signs of forced entry, indicating the victim either trusted her attacker or knew them very well. As detectives meticulously searched the cold room, they discovered a highly disturbing handwritten note lying directly beside the cold, lifeless body. The chilling message read, "Never look for the devil, because he will always find you by himself," spreading an eerie panic. Forensic experts carefully dusted the wooden furniture for fingerprints, trying to piece together the final, terrifying moments of the elderly woman. Neighbors described Tamara Tsareva as a deeply kind, generous person who frequently invited lonely travelers into her warm home for hot tea. However, a local resident named Vladimir soon came forward with a deeply bizarre story that instantly shifted the entire criminal investigation. 1 year prior, Vladimir was walking past the local cemetery late at night when he suddenly noticed a flickering light among graves. Peering through the dark iron gates, he saw the elderly woman lighting dozens of small candles around a fresh, snowy burial plot. She was swaying rhythmically back and forth in the freezing wind, muttering strange, unintelligible words into the cold, silent midnight air. Rumors quickly spread through the small, superstitious village that the old woman was practicing dark witchcraft and communing with evil spirits. In reality, the grieving mother had lost both her beloved husband during the war and her young son to a sudden illness. The frequent nightly visits to the cemetery were merely her desperate way of coping with an endless, deeply agonizing personal heartbreak. Desperate for answers, investigators shifted their focus to a local youth named Valeriy Yartsev, who regularly helped her with heavy chores. Valeriy was known to be a simple-minded young man with distinct eccentricities, who frequently complained of severe, blinding chronic migraines. During a tense, prolonged interrogation under the dim green lights, the distressed young man unexpectedly broke down and confessed to murder. He claimed he was digging a flower bed on her property when he accidentally broke her favorite iron shovel during hard labor. According to his confused statement, the old woman began scolding him harshly, triggering a sudden, blinding headache inside his mind. Everything went completely dark inside his head, and in a fit of uncontrollable rage, he viciously struck her down with force. Although the victim's close relatives strongly doubted his erratic story, the swift machine of Soviet justice was already moving very fast. Technicians matched his fingerprints to several old surfaces inside the small house, providing seemingly undeniable physical proof for the state prosecution. The local court quickly found him guilty, sentencing the simple-minded youth to 15 long years in a maximum security labor colony. Valeriy accepted his harsh fate with complete, silent submission, completely unaware that a much more sinister monster was still walking free. The quiet spring of 1977 brought no peace to Mozhga, as a terrifying second wave of dark violence unexpectedly struck the small town. 15-year-old schoolgirl Inga Kuksina was laughing happily with her close friends in the communal courtyard completely unaware of the lurking danger. As the cold evening shadows grew longer over the courtyard, the young girl suddenly vanished into thin air without leaving a single trace. Panicked families and local volunteers searched the dark neighborhoods until dawn, shouting her name into the freezing, empty midnight mist. The next morning, a lone factory worker discovered her lifeless body hidden on a desolate, weed-covered wasteland at the town's edge. The horrific scene thoroughly shocked the veteran forensic medical experts, revealing an incredible amount of sheer brutality inflicted upon the teenager. The victim had suffered numerous terrible injuries, including a brutally broken jaw, yet there were absolutely no physical signs of sexual assault. Resting directly upon the victim's chest was a highly striking, distinctive necklace made of large, polished, natural amber beads. The discovery of this prominent jewelry piece triggered an immediate correlation to the unsolved homicide of the elderly woman from last year. Experienced detectives instantly remembered that an identical amber necklace had been reported stolen from Tamara Sareva's house just 1 year earlier. A chilling realization dawned upon the investigators. The true, ruthless killer was still walking free, while an innocent man sat in prison. Near the body, forensic technicians carefully preserved a clear boot print pressed deeply into the wet, soft spring mud. The unique herringbone print perfectly matched the precise measurements of the mysterious tracking print found at the first crime scene. The absolute confirmation of the matching boot prints meant both horrific murders were undoubtedly committed by the exact same monstrous individual. An intensive, massive manhunt immediately began across the region, with officers systematically questioning taxi drivers and local bus operators. A breakthrough came when an alert bus driver recalled seeing Inga talking to a specific young man before her disappearance. Working late into the night, artists created a detailed composite sketch based entirely on the crucial eyewitness testimony. The newly drawn composite face sketch was immediately distributed to every single militia station and neighborhood precinct in the city. An alert neighborhood precinct officer quickly recognized the facial features, identifying the mysterious suspect as a local resident named Buzykin. Detectives rushed to locate a regular associate of his named Buzykin, hoping to gather critical details about his current location. During the interrogation, the witness revealed that Buzykin frequently associated with a highly elusive black market dealer known as Pan Zuza. Pan Zuza was the underground criminal alias of a clever, sophisticated con artist, whose real name was Zinovy Panov. Panov had mockingly adopted the grand theatrical nickname from a highly popular Soviet comedy television show of that era. The sophisticated con artist specialized in selling fake family treasures made of cheap brass to wealthy, unsuspecting antique collectors. The witness claimed that during a recent conversation, Pan Zuza had accidentally boasted about having someone else's blood on his hands. Militia informants quickly learned that Pan Zuza was actively planning another major scam at a highly unusual location in Moscow. The underground exchange was scheduled to take place at the historic Rostokino Aqueduct, a massive, isolated concrete structure. Detectives carefully organized a highly secretive sting operation, hiding behind the dark stone pillars as freezing rain fell. When Panov finally appeared to exchange the counterfeit antique brooch for cash, armed officers instantly swarmed the bridge. The arrogant criminal was forcefully pinned down against the wet stone, his refined facade completely shattering in an instant. Soviet investigators locked the heavy steel doors behind Zinovy Panov, initiating a tense psychological battle to break his carefully constructed criminal silence. The elegant con artist sat rigidly under the harsh, flickering tube light, desperately maintaining his calm, sophisticated, aristocratic demeanor. Pan Zuza smoothly adjusted his expensive coat collar, repeatedly insisting that he was merely a sophisticated merchant of fine jewelry antiques. He flatly denied ever knowing any 15-year-old schoolgirls, declaring that a high-profile cultural gentleman like him never walked in mud. Detectives suddenly slammed a faded photograph onto the scarred wooden table, displaying the exact location where Inga's body was discovered. When Panov calmly looked down at the grim evidence, His smooth white hands experienced a momentary, subtle muscular tremor. The persistent thumping sound of an old mechanical wall clock filled the heavy room, intensifying the psychological pressure on the suspect. Investigators firmly pushed the stolen amber necklace across the table, watching for any sudden cracks in his aristocratic composure. Panov immediately recognized the unique glowing beads, but he calmly claimed he had purchased them from a common street trader. The cunning swindler then revealed a crucial secret, admitting he had later gifted that specific necklace to his secret local mistress. This unexpected revelation instantly provided detectives with a new name, shifting the entire search to a 32-year-old married woman. Her name was Lyubov Retisheva, a quiet mother who lived a seemingly ordinary life in a nearby Soviet housing block. When two plainclothes militia officers unexpectedly knocked on her apartment door, Lyubov instantly lost her breath from profound shock. She begged the investigators to speak quietly in the narrow hallway, desperately hiding the illicit affair from her sleeping husband. Lyubov confessed that her marriage was a loveless prison, and she had eagerly sought a passionate escape with the con artist. She explained that Pan Zuza had approached her on the street several weeks ago, silently sliding the amber necklace into her purse. However, she had angrily rejected his manipulative gift after discovering that the sophisticated gentleman was already legally married to another. Panov had reportedly flown into a violent rage, striking her across the face before aggressively retrieving the amber necklace. Lyubov's detailed testimony completely cleared Panov of the actual execution of the murder, leaving detectives back at a frustrating dead end. The focus immediately shifted back to the original prime suspect, Alexey Buzykin, whose whereabouts remained entirely unknown to the authorities. Investigators rushed directly to Buzykin's legal residence, where they found only his estranged wife, packed to leave the house. The bitter woman coldly informed detectives that she was actively divorcing her unstable husband, completely unaware of his whereabouts. When detectives sternly asked about his clothing, she pointed directly to a dark corner where his winter gear was kept. Inside the dark closet, investigators discovered a pair of thick, muddy rubber boots that sent a shiver down their spines. A forensic expert carefully extracted the heavy boots, immediately turning them over to inspect the distinctive pattern on the sole. The underside of the rubber boot displayed the exact herringbone tree pattern that perfectly matched the tragic prints from the wasteland. The forensic match was absolutely flawless, providing the undeniable physical proof needed to condemn Alexey Buzykin as the true monster. Next, handwriting specialists analyzed the chilling devil note found near Tamara Sareva's body, comparing it to Buzykin's official military documents. The slant, the spacing, and the aggressive pressure of the pen stroke resulted in an absolute match of the handwriting. The dark puzzle was complete, but the dangerous, predatory killer was currently wandering the public dance floors, looking for a new victim. The dangerous fugitive moved swiftly through the deep shadows of the park, his heavy footsteps muffled by the cold, wet soil. He approached the perimeter of the open-air dance floor, carefully observing the small crowd of local residents from behind a birch tree. A vintage Soviet loudspeaker hung loosely from a wooden pole, casting faint, crackling music across the desolate and chilly public park. Several young couples danced slowly on the wooden platform, their pale figures moving rhythmically under a single string of weak bulbs. Buzykin adjusted the collar of his coat, his posture extremely tense, as his featureless head continuously scanned for any suspicious movements. Unbeknownst to the ruthless killer, the entire public park had been completely transformed into a massive, highly coordinated undercover dragnet. Two experienced plainclothes operatives sat quietly on a nearby bench, pretending to play a highly intense game of wooden dominoes. They regularly slammed the small rectangular pieces onto the table, perfectly mimicking the loud, familiar sounds of casual neighborhood residents. A female militia officer stood near the ice cream kiosk, disguised as a common babushka, wearing a thick, patterned shawl. Her hidden hand firmly gripped a heavy metallic signal flashlight inside her pocket, waiting patiently for the exact moment to to strike. A young sergeant disguised as a common city street sweep moved his wooden broom rhythmically across the damp concrete path. He carefully monitored the northern entrance, his sweeping motions deliberate as his hidden radio earpiece crackled with static electricity. Every exit was completely blocked by heavily armed militia units hidden inside an unmarked gray utility van nearby. Inside the dark vehicle, 5 officers sat in absolute heavy silence, checking the iron mechanisms of their service pistols. The agonizing wait dragged on for hours, the heavy tension inside the park growing thicker with every passing cold minute. Suddenly, Buzykin stepped out from the deep tree shadows, confidently walking toward the brightly lit center of the dance platform. The undercover babushka immediately noticed his specific walking gait, her featureless head tilting upward to confirm the target's identity. She instantly pulled the heavy metal flashlight from her pocket, clicking the switch twice to send a sharp flash of light. The domino players immediately stood up from their wooden table, their chairs scraping loudly against the rough concrete floor. The street sweeper dropped his wooden broom with force, instantly reaching inside his utility vest for his concealed weapon. Buzykin instantly realized the imminent danger, his featureless head snapping backward as he saw the coordinated movements around him. In a desperate bid for freedom, the dangerous predator spun around violently and sprinted toward the dark western perimeter fence. The heavy steel doors of the gray utility van burst open with a loud bang, and armed officers poured out. They shouted command orders into the cold midnight air, their heavy boots splashing violently through muddy water patches in pursuit. Buzykin ran blindly through the dense thickets of the park, branches clawing violently at his tattered jacket as he fled. He reached the high wooden fence, desperately clawing at the rough planks to lift his heavy body over the top. Suddenly, 2 undercover operatives lunged from the adjacent shadows, forcefully grabbing his legs to drag him back down. The fugitive crashed heavily onto the wet, frozen ground, struggling violently as the officers fought to restrain his limbs. A metallic click echoed through the dark woods as heavy steel handcuffs were forcefully locked around his white wrists. The dangerous predator was completely subdued, his heavy breathing casting thick white vapor plumes into the cold, silent midnight air. The heavy metal doors locked firmly inside the bleak interrogation room, sealing Alexey Buzykin alone with the waiting state investigators. The ruthless predator sat rigidly beneath the flickering fluorescent green tube light, stubbornly maintaining a cold, expressionless, silent defiance. A senior detective systematically unbuckled his heavy leather case file, slowly laying out the grim physical evidence across the desk. Buzykin slowly exhaled a thick cloud of nervous breath, his featureless white hands tightly gripping the edges of the table. The investigator suddenly slammed the horrific forensic photographs of young Inga Kuksina directly beneath the suspect's featureless white face. The stark images captured the brutal reality of the wasteland, forcing the remorseless killer to confront his monstrous deeds. Buzykin instantly froze as he stared down at the evidence, his tense shoulder muscles visibly trembling under his jacket. The heavy silence inside the room was broken only by the loud, rhythmic ticking of an old mechanical clock. The persistent sound weighed heavily on his fractured psyche, slowly eroding the last remnants of his cold, criminal confidence. The detective leaned forward aggressively, his low voice demanding a full explanation for the matching herringbone rubber boot prints. Unable to withstand the mounting psychological pressure, the dangerous predator suddenly buried his face in his trembling white hands. A sudden torrent of heavy tears soaked his skin as he finally began to confess his horrific crimes aloud. Buzykin detailed his dark path, revealing how childhood isolation inside a harsh Soviet orphanage had deeply twisted his mind. He recounted his return from military service, only to find his first love in the arms of an unknown man. The profound humiliation created a lingering hatred for women, a dark desire for vengeance that festered inside his soul. He married out of sheer desperation, but his domestic life quickly degenerated into a series of bitter, aggressive arguments. On that fateful day in 1976, Buzykin had randomly wandered onto Tamara Tsareva's rural village property. The elderly woman kindly invited him inside for hot tea, listening patiently to his endless complaints about his marriage. When she gently suggested that his innocent child deserved financial support, Buzykin experienced a sudden, violent surge of rage. The old woman unfortunately used a highly offensive local term, instantly triggering a total psychological break inside his mind. He brutally assaulted her with a heavy iron padlock, striking her repeatedly until she collapsed onto the floorboards. To ensure her absolute silence, the merciless monster forcefully drove a large iron nail directly into her neck. He noticed the glowing amber beads resting on the dresser, immediately pocketing them as a dark personal trophy. Buzykin then composed the deceptive devil note on a scrap of paper, intentionally trying to confuse the state investigators. He fled the village house unnoticed, completely exhilarated when he later discovered that an innocent youth had been convicted. The killer kept the stolen amber necklace with him constantly, foolishly believing it served as a protective magical talisman. In 1977, he crossed paths with young Inga Kuksina, who bore a terrifying resemblance to his unfaithful first love. A blinding surge of primitive madness consumed his mind, driving him to forcefully drag the helpless teenager into the wasteland. He violently choked her into unconsciousness, leaving the glowing amber beads directly onto her chest before running into the dark. The detailed confession thoroughly horrified the investigators, but the true depth of his monstrous transformation was still hidden from them. The dark walls of the Soviet prison isolation ward closed tightly around Alexey Buzykin, where a deep, vengeful hatred began festering further. He sat quietly in the heavy midnight shadows, his featureless white head turning slowly as he secretly formulated a ruthless escape plot. Buzykin slowly approached his cellmates under the cover of total darkness, whispering malicious promises of freedom into the freezing midnight mist. The desperate criminals secretly gathered around a tiny concrete corner, systematically sharpening common metal dining spoons against the rough wooden floorboards. Metallic scraping sounds echoed softly through the quiet ward, turning simple household utensils into dangerous, sharp weapons for a bloody breakout. However, a fellow inmate named Rudolf Priksa grew deeply terrified of the plan, firmly advising the group to halt the dangerous idea. Buzykin instantly suspected absolute betrayal, his featureless white head snapping backward as a blinding surge of paranoid madness consumed his mind. He believed Rudolf would expose the plot to the prison guards, sealing his own execution by firing squad without any hope. In the dead of night, the cold-blooded monster lunged at Rudolf, initiating a brutal, agonizingly prolonged assault inside the narrow cell. The helpless victim desperately begged for a quick death, pleading for an immediate end to the severe, torturous physical agony. Yet the sadistic executioner only grew more enraged, systematically striking the victim's head with a heavy piece of iron prison hardware. As he brutally battered the dying man, Buzykin softly whispered a chilling phrase that would forever haunt the dark history. He muttered, "Wait patiently, my little boy, because you will die very soon," spreading a sickening panic into the quiet room. The horrific murder of Rudolf Priksa thoroughly shocked the prison administration, launching an immediate internal investigation by the state prosecutor. As detectives dug deeper into the prison records, they uncovered another highly suspicious death associated with the same cell block. Just months earlier, another inmate named Viktor Firstov had been discovered dead, hanging from a leather belt inside his cell. The incident had been quickly dismissed by prison staff as a tragic suicide due to severe depression during long confinement. However, a new forensic analysis of the old files revealed faint, distinctive strangulation bruises beneath the victim's neck fabric. Buzykin had aggressively strangled Viktor into complete unconsciousness, later staging the entire scene to look like a desperate, self-inflicted hanging. The state prosecution realized that Buzykin's violent madness was accelerating rapidly, converting him into an uncontrollable, bloodthirsty prison camp monster. He blamed the entire external world for his personal failures, directing his blind hatred toward every helpless soul around him. A special medical board conducted a rigorous psychological evaluation, systematically reviewing his history of extreme violence and orphanage childhood. Despite his distinct eccentricities and chronic migraines, the specialized state experts officially declared Alexey Buzykin completely sane and responsible. The final supreme judicial trial of the monster attracted massive national attention, filling the local courthouse with deeply outraged citizens. The state judge systematically listed the long, horrific series of cold-blooded crimes, his low voice echoing heavily through the courtroom. Buzykin stood inside the secure iron cage enclosure, his featureless white head remaining completely motionless as the sentence was read. The Supreme Court officially condemned him to the ultimate penalty under Soviet law, sentencing the unrepentant killer to execution by firing squad. The severe, just sentence brought a profound sense of relief to the grieving families and the deeply terrified public of Mozhga. Following the conclusive trial, the local authorities immediately ordered the absolute release of the wrongfully convicted youth, Valeriy Yartsev. The simple-minded young man walked out into the bright morning light, his long nightmare finally ending after years of agonizing injustice. The official state decree for Valeriy Yartsev's full legal rehabilitation was systematically logged inside the central archives of the regional procuracy office. Medical teams carefully transferred the traumatized youth to a local civilian rehabilitation center, monitoring his continuous, severe chronic migraine attacks closely. Valeriy sat quietly near a frost-covered window frame, his featureless white head resting heavily against the cold glass as time slowly passed. Local community members initially treated the released youth with a heavy, visible suspicion, whispering quietly whenever he walked down the path. The deep psychological scars of the wrongful maximum security conviction made him highly withdrawn, completely altering his fragile relationship with society. A designated state social worker visited his small family home weekly, systematically documenting his physical recovery and severe mental trauma. The local militia precinct kept an official, highly detailed file on his transition, ensuring that no further investigative errors could occur. Gradually, the truth of his absolute innocence spread across Mozhga, and the heavy atmosphere of hostility slowly turned into deep sympathy. Valeriy slowly returned to light physical labor, picking up a wooden broom to sweep dry leaves away from his path. The simple rhythmic movements offered a therapeutic escape from the lingering prison cell nightmares that still haunted his midnight hours. Meanwhile, state investigators systematically re-examined every single piece of evidence from Alexey Buzykin's long, horrific path of dark violence. The heavy iron lock used to assault Tamara Zareva was placed inside a secure glass evidence display cabinet for permanent storage. Appeals analysis reports were permanently bound into the official state historical crime registry, finalizing the documentation of the high-profile case. The stolen amber necklace was legally returned to the victim's grieving daughter, who placed the distinctive beads into a small velvet box. The tragic heirloom served as a silent, powerful reminder of her mother's kind nature and her deeply unfair, brutal end. The regional court officials held a mandatory review conference, ensuring that every officer involved in the initial error faced strict administrative punishment. Official reprimand documents were aggressively stamped and finalized, sending a clear warning throughout the entire Soviet law enforcement system. The simple wooden izba house where Tamara Tsareva lived stood completely abandoned, slowly succumbing to the harsh, freezing local elements. The desolate wasteland where Inga Kuksina met her tragic fate remained completely silent, the high electrical pylons towering over the empty grass. The small town of Mozhga slowly healed from the profound terror, the heavy atmosphere of fear finally lifting from the daily lives of residents. Alexey Buzykin's deep psychological breakdown inside the prison camp was thoroughly documented by the state psychiatric prison ward physicians. The unrepentant monster spent his final dark days inside a narrow concrete cell, awaiting the absolute execution of his supreme death penalty. The violent memory of his terrifying phrase muttered to Rudolf Prixa, continued to linger heavily inside the grim prison ward. Handwritten notes from his official psychiatric files revealed an incredible amount of deep, unfixable paranoid madness festering within his inner mind. Every violent act was driven by a deep inability to handle personal rejection, transforming a weak youth into a bloodthirsty prison killer. His ex-wife legally changed her family name and relocated to a distant Soviet region, completely erasing his dark presence from her life. The innocent youth Valeriy Yartsev slowly rebuilt his damaged life, his simple mind finding peace within the quiet village routines. His chronic migraines gradually subsided as the heavy, dark cloud of the wrongful conviction was completely removed from his mind. The absolute triumph of the law ensured that the real monster paid the ultimate price, restoring unnecessary justice to society. The dark file of the Amber Bead killings was permanently closed. Yet the grim lesson of deep betrayal remained inside the history. The historic judicial archives permanently preserved the massive case files, serving as an enduring testament to the meticulous cross-regional investigation. The shocking exposure of the initial investigative error forced the regional Soviet procuracy to implement extensive, mandatory administrative reforms. Every district prosecutor was systematically retrained in rigorous fingerprint collection methods, completely eliminating reliance on hasty, unverified confessions. The tragic sacrifice of young Inga Kuksina fundamentally altered the local precinct patrol schedules, ensuring permanent protection around isolated town limits. Militia patrol units systematically navigated the remote frozen wastelands every night, their heavy black leather boots crushing the deep winter crust. The presence of armed state officers offered a visible, reassuring shield to the deeply traumatized public families living in Mozhga. The dense gray morning mist slowly rolled across the quiet municipal square, signaling a peaceful new chapter for the community. The dark memory of the ruthless monster, Alexey Buzykin, slowly faded into the dense, silent historical archives of Udmurt. The tragic case serves as a timeless, powerful reminder of how human deception can deeply rupture the fragile peace of a town. The final documentation of the Amber Bead investigation was systematically marked with a permanent state preservation seal, closing the file. Valeriy Yartsev lived out his ordinary remaining years in complete tranquility, his simple mind permanently shielded from the outside world. The heavy wooden gate of his small family cottage remained firmly shut against the curious glances of wandering strangers. The precise handwriting comparison reports were carefully locked inside a heavy, dark iron safe box for absolute historic protection. The ultimate penalty delivered to the unrepentant killer stood as a firm, undeniable victory for the Soviet criminal justice system. The dark chapter of Mozhga was officially finished, but the deep internal scars left behind would endure for several decades.